What I want to know is, why does everyone hate Pokémon Scarlet and Violet?
Well, it's quite a question, isn't it?
I mean, it is. I mean, for goodness sake, this game has been receiving quite a lot of criticism online, on the internet, on places like Metacritic, etc. and so forth. Now, we've played the game, and to be honest with you, I just can't really see why it's getting so much undeserved hate like this.
No, I think it's got a 2.8 score on, where's that?
The user score on Metacritic right now stands at 2.8.
Yes, they haven't been treating it very well.
Very low.
But as you say, we've had the game running here and played the game, and we can't really see everything they're saying, can we?
Not everything. So, okay, let's firstly have a look at some of the negative points to do with this game, which are genuine criticisms. Any game, of course, is open to criticism. So, firstly, we've got in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet some occasional visual glitches, like pop-in or clipping, that kind of thing going on. So, as you're moving through the open world in the game, you might, for example, in the distance see some buildings or features popping in, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you see that in quite a few games, don't you, really?
To be strict with you, as it were, I don't think in this day and age that should really be happening anymore. But we have to consider, of course, this is a very, very large open world game on the Nintendo Switch hardware. So Nintendo Switch is no PS5, it's no RTX 3090 Ti, etc. Nintendo never really was about the spectacular graphics. They're more so about the quality of the game. So we can't really, attack this game and say, oh, it's got some pop-in, it's got a bit of clipping. Okay, I mean, that's a bit off, really, but it's not a deal breaker. It's something you kind of just have to really, learn to live with in the game, and it also might be something that perhaps they're going to patch in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, it could be. So, okay, probably, in terms of that, games on the Switch might do that because of processing power.
The console has, of course, less power than the PS5, so we understand with such a huge open-world game, some sacrifices perhaps had to be made during development. You sort of understand these things.
Okay.
Another criticism, of course, and one that I saw actually myself, was that sometimes the frame rate stutters while you're moving around the open world. That to me was, okay, that's a bit noticeable. Other games like Miitopia also do that sometimes on the Nintendo Switch, and this, of course, once again will be to do with the power of the console not necessarily being able to handle what they're asking of it.
Yes, indeed. Yes, you're going to get that. That was noted. Is that a really big problem?
I think it's something they could perhaps address in a patch. That's what I'm going to say. It's not ideal, but, it's understandable in many ways. Then, of course, on the performance side of things, we've got some blurry textures in some parts of the game. So, for example, you might see some blurry trees or buildings in the distance. One time, the back of a chap's head looked very, very blurry, like a PS1 texture or something. So, I mean, in some parts of the game, it's obvious they've worked really hard on the visuals, like the close-up character models and that kind of thing, but other areas, perhaps they've cut corners, most likely due to performance reasons once again, I'd say.
So the main characters, the main buildings, the main things, they are okay, is that what you're saying?
Yes, the main characters, the buildings, the environments all look good, particularly the up-close human character models look very nice indeed, with some great materials being used there. It's just that in some parts of the game, as I say, very much in the distance or on lesser NPC models, we're seeing some blurry textures, yes.
Okay, so now another thing is, what about voice acting?
Well, exactly. I know it's sort of a Nintendo series thing to not have voice acting, and in the Pokemon series as well, but in this day and age, having the characters moving their mouths around with no sound coming out, it just doesn't really seem right, does it?
Well, so when we say no sound, are we talking? I mean, just nothing at all. No grunts, no sort of this sort of thing.
Well, no speech. No, just
speech at all.
Moving mouths, but no speech. And I understand once again, it's something Nintendo does. They do it in the Zelda series sometimes as well. But if you recall, in Hyrule Warriors, when that first came out, the characters were also mute despite moving their mouths, and that didn't really go down very well. So in subsequent games in that series, I do believe they introduced some basic voice acting, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, they may well have done. So players of this particular game, I wonder if that's going to be too much of a problem if they're not used to voice acting up to now.
Well, exactly. If the series is well known for not really having a bunch of voice acting, then this may not be a deal breaker to Pokemon players either. Now, my last point of criticism that I can see here that might perhaps be valid is that for newcomers, this series may be a little bit bewildering in terms of its mechanics, all the strengths and weaknesses to learn and that kind of thing, but that's not really a criticism of this particular game. That's more of an angle on the series as a whole. It's quite, there's a lot to learn, shall we say. It's that kind of thing. Yeah,
so you're saying for newcomers, and I suppose that applies a bit to the voice acting we said before. Someone's never played the game before, then there's no voice acting, it might bother them.
Indeed. So, I mean, we've had a look at some of the negative points there to do with this game, but really, if you ask me, as we're about to get into the positive points now, we're going to see these don't really warrant a score of 2.8 out of 10. That's just extremely harsh. So
it is harsh, yes, indeed. So there's a few points we've mentioned as to why they hate it.
But let's have a look at why they should like it.
Okay.
Alright, so firstly, we've got some great music in this game. Even if you're a first timer to the series, there's no denying some of the tunes are nice, hummable, and really well put together. So this is of course a staple of Nintendo games. They always have nice music, and Pokémon Scarlet and Violet are no different.
Yes, indeed. So, and also, of course, there is the graphics and art style. What do you think about those?
I think they're nice. So if we discount any graphical glitches, pop-in, that kind of thing, the art style and the presentation of the game, it looks really good. It's nicely presented. You've got this cartoony theme going. You know, the art composition, if you will, all matches very nicely and is pleasing to look at. So I can't really fault the art style at all, to be honest, aside from those early issues I mentioned. And as I said once again, the close-up shots of those characters looking very nice indeed and very current gen. So
yes.
Can't really fault that at all.
Yes, because I've seen someone say a thing about graphics and things like that, more than too happy. But we're saying, no, hang on, we've had a look, and we've played a few games. You've played a few games.
Played a few, old chap, yes.
Yeah. So you think they're not too bad?
Not too bad. I mean, once again, consider the Nintendo Switch hardware. It's not a super-powered console, so we have to make allowances for that. I mean, I think, yes, there could have been a better job done on the long-distance graphics side of things. Perhaps they could have reduced the amount of stuttering and clipping and that kind of thing and pop-in going on. But all in all, you can't really complain too much. It does look nice. It's a nice-looking game, no doubt.
Okay, so what about when we're looking at the combat element of this game?
Well, of course, the meat and potatoes of the game. That's right. After all, it is a turn-based combat series, and that combat is solid, as you would expect from this series. It's, if you like role-playing games and turn-based games and that kind of thing, is all here. So, once again, the core bread and butter mechanics of the gameplay, they do work, as they always have done. It's a formula that's been going for many years, and it hasn't failed up until this point, so it's still to be found here, present and correct. And then, of course, we move on to another strong point for this game, and that's the interesting variety of characters, as you often find in Nintendo games. You've got the head of the academy with his secret identity, you've got the lively president of the school council with her love for battling, you've got Professor Sada's son, the master chef, as it were, not master chief, master chef. He's very good at, cooking up things. You've got the secretive Miss Penny, you've got the various creative gym leaders in the game, such as Katie the chocolatier, and many others to be found in there. And of course you have Professor Sada herself, who has a rather large surprise of her own waiting to be found. All these characters are well designed and, they have visually appealing looks and outfits and that kind of thing with interesting personalities. It's just, in my opinion, a bit of a shame they don't have voice acting, but hey, that's part of the series, that's how it works. The character design is certainly to be found here to a very high standard, in my opinion.
Yes, okay, so you said earlier about this being an open world game.
Yes.
So, open worlds can be up and down sometimes, some people's opinion, but what do you think about the open world exploration element of the game, etc.?
Well, yes, it's a very good point. Many open world games, they don't quite get the balance right between the size of the world and the things to do in the world. This is, of course, a problem that Breath of the Wild had when it first came out. It had this beautiful, large open world, but the trouble was there weren't really too many things going on inside that world, apart from the shrines in that particular game. Now, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet does address this problem quite well, if you ask me. There are many things to do in the world. There are 3 separate storylines to go through, each with various locations to visit, and of course along the way you've got lots and lots of little critters to fight and enemies to battle, so it's not as though the world is empty. I'll admit that in places it does feel perhaps a tad sparse, but you do have NPCs dotted around, Pokemon centers to heal your team, etc. and so forth, so it doesn't really feel empty or barren, I'd say. Again, perhaps sparse in a few points, but that is one of the weaknesses of the open world genre. Overall, they've done a very good job of balancing the size and scale of the world with the contents of the world, so I can't really fault them on that point.
Yes, indeed. So, now, one handy thing about this game is being such a big open world, is it has a rideable mount, is this correct?
That's right, and they've actually done a very good job with that rideable mount, incorporating it into the story. There's ways to upgrade it, it's rather likeable, it's a well done feature, and if you ask me, a necessary one, given the size of the open world. You definitely are going to want to use that rideable mount if you're to explore the world in any sort of pacely fashion, as it were. You're going to be very, very slow otherwise, and it's quite fun to do. They've got a dash mechanic, a jump, swimming mechanics, and many other things to help you on your way. It's certainly a fun element, yes.
Yes, so can you actually, come off the mount and walk if you want to?
Oh yes, you can do, but most of the time, 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to be using the mount because of course it's just much, much faster.
Yes.
And we don't have time to hang about now, do we?
That's right.
But yes, and last of all, fellows, the final point we have to say in favour of this game is that the story and the difficulty are paced well and they make sense. So it's well structured despite being an open world, it's not chaotic at all, there's always a very, very clear indication of where you're supposed to be going, the story ties in together well and has a satisfying ending. So this is not a game that's been rushed or thrown together, a lot of love has gone into this game, and whilst yes it does have some negative points, overall they don't weigh the game down that much in my opinion.
Yes, so overall what we're saying here is perhaps we don't 100% agree with the rather harsh scorings on some of the sites out there.
Well, indeed, the response from many users who are perhaps venting that disappointment by slapping the 1-star button on it, and it's really unjustified if you ask me, and it has brought down that user review quite a lot, perhaps below what it should be. If you ask me, in my opinion, a fair and honest review score for this game would be about 7.5 out of 10. That's what I'd give it. What do you say, Bertie?
Well, I think that's quite, generous. I think on the upper scale there. Given what we said, given the negatives we said, and the positives we said, yes, it's probably a sensible sort of score.
Well, I'd say so. Indeed, it's not a 2.8 out of 10. So,
no.
And of course, you have to take what you find on the internet with a pinch of salt many times. You have to do your own research, look into the situation, and satisfy yourself that the game you're about to play is something you're going to enjoy. But we hope indeed, fellows, that this has helped you a bit to evaluate this game. That's our take on whether or not this game is worthy of these awful, terrible review scores and things people are saying about it.
Yes.
In our opinion, it doesn't really justify that at all. Despite the positives and negatives we've outlined there, overall, it's a well put together game. But this has indeed been GameChap and Bertie discussing Pokémon Scarlet and Violet on the Nintendo Switch. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you once more in the next exciting outing. Until then!